I normally don't do this, right? I normally don't do this, and it's one of those things that I think is kind of antiquated in radio because there's so many choices out there, and people will say, well, they're on another station, you don't want to talk about it. But I think that idea is kind of passe, if you will, because times are different, right? Times change, if you will. And so I had the pleasure, as many of you know, I talk about him all the time. I'm very close with, and he's my brother. He really is. He's my brother, Killer Michael Render. And about a year ago, he put me in a group text with a young man who is probably right now, not even arguably, but definitively one of the most influential radio voices, forget radio, one of the most influential voices in culture, politics, and so on in the urban community. His name is Charlamagne the God. There's been countless stories written about his influence. His show was the show during the 2020 election where Kamala Harris, Joe Biden said, "If you ain't black if you don't vote for me." That was his show that happened on, and Kamala Harris was on there during that election cycle, and she talked about how she listened to Tupac in college and smoked weed. And so these things, this is his show, right? So after that and during this time, he's grown, the audience has grown, and he's become a very strong and powerful and influential is the more correct word to use, influential voice in politics, but in the young urban community. And so he had on this morning. He's a good guy. He and I have talked over text. I've been trying to get him on the show. He's on in the morning, so nighttime when I'm on the air, he's usually going to bed because he's morning, So anyway, but we spoken a couple times, not a lot, but a couple times. I wouldn't dare say he's my boy or he's my friend or anything. I'd like to grow a relationship with him because I think he's a brilliant young man who gets too much flack from the left, and I think that flack is going to grow, and you'll hear why coming in a couple seconds. So anyway, he had Candace Owens on this morning. And I have you've heard, if you listen to the show, I've had my issues with Candace Owens. I think sometimes that she's too out there, too brass. I especially had problems with her during the George Floyd, when the whole country, even Republicans, were looking at that video and saying, I kind of see that this is kind of bad. When you got Sean Hannity on the air talking about on Fox News and the radio talking about, this is tough. This is tough to watch. I believe as a person, now our goals may be different, right? But I believe as my goal is to bring more minority voters into the Republican side. At least let me push back on that a little bit. I want to open up the Republicans and conservatism to minority groups. In other words, listen, that's it. Whether you vote for them or not is not here nor there with me. It's not my job to get you to vote for someone. It's my job to get you to at least listen and skirt through the narrative, skirt through the fog and the haze of the lies and just listen. And so I got mad at her then because, she was talking about him being high and everything. And I just said, man, this is a great opportunity to bring people into the Republican fold. And you're kind of just going against the entire narrative. But at the same time, I understood your truth is your truth. Meaning by that, I know a lot of people don't understand what I mean by that. But if you have an opinion and you share that opinion, that's your opinion, right? And so you're entitled to your opinion. But I thought it was a missed opportunity. And that was one of the times I disagreed with her vehemently. But she was on this show this morning with Charlamagne the God and his crew. And it was about an hour long. And not now, ladies and gentlemen, because I want you listening to me. But if you get a chance tonight before you go to bed, just pull it up on YouTube and check it out. Here's what's so fascinating and phenomenal about this interview. Finally, we had an opportunity to listen to a group of young people sit around and talk politely to each other about politics. There was no name calling. There was no cutting off. There was no yelling. It was a polite conversation about politics, about Democrats, about the history, and Candace breaking it down. Here's a quick clip of one thing she said. Now, before I play this clip, I want you to, she's a very brilliant woman. I'm not disrespecting. I'm kind of halfway being funny here, but I've been in this game a long time. I said this 5 years ago.
But I thought it was weird when all of a sudden the people that liked Trump, everyone thought he was like this iconic symbol of business. He was in rap songs. Trump was a status, flipped on him in 1 second. I didn't buy the narrative that he was in the media for 3-4 decades, and suddenly you wanted me to believe overnight that he was like Adolf Hitler and a racist. So I just didn't trust the media's narrative about him, and so I decided to actually listen to what he said. I still didn't vote for him in 2016. But I wanted to just listen to what he actually said. And then when I saw what he was saying versus how it was being reported, I just found it to be extremely dishonest. So I started researching more, learning more, and then I got kind of angry.
And so I've said that 1,000 times, but neither here nor there. I'm not here to gloat about myself. Well, yes, I am. No, I'm not. I'm just kidding. But I've said that 1,000 times. If you listen to the show, you know I've said that 1,000 times. But she's saying it, and they're allowing her to say it. That is the most phenomenal thing. This is a conversation where the host asks a question. Hey, what do you think about this? And she answers the question. More importantly, she's given the opportunity to give a full answer and not be chopped up and not be cut off. She goes into another part where she talks about, they talked about you're married to a white guy. The interesting thing is, I don't know, and I don't know this, I'm not saying this to be true or not, I'm just saying I don't know how many urban talk radio shows would ask Serena about being married to a white guy, or Kamala Harris being married to a white guy, or Justice Ketanji Brown being married to a white guy. But that's neither here nor there. This was asked of her that she's married to a white guy. And here's what she said.
Because Black Americans are still, a lot of Black Americans, I should say, are still living under this deception that Lyndon Baines Johnson was a good president, even though he wasn't a vowed racist. I mean, he hated Black people. I mean, one of the, so many times, hard R referring to us as the N-word. I'll have those N-words voting Democrat for the next 200 years.
So this is the wrong clip. So what we'll do, we'll get back to you on that label, on that clip. But she talks about being married to a white guy. She said he's brilliant, right? And they asked, she said, and she quoted Shelby Steele. One thing I loved about this interview, she referenced Thomas Sowell. The more we get Dr. Thomas Sowell's name out there into the public, particularly into urban and young people. When I say urban, I mean young, not necessarily black or white. I just mean young, right? As more we get Dr. Thomas Sowell's name out there, Walter Williams' name out there, Shelby Steele's name out there, people will go on their own and research them and start to read them. And then they'll start to see, wait a minute, why is this guy being kept from me? Like, why have I been inundated with Al Sharpton and Ben Crump and Jesse Jackson, and I don't know anything about this guy? Why isn't this guy in my school? Why isn't these guys' books in my schools? Like, when you talk about schools and banning books, you don't want to teach our history? All right, I dare you to put basic economics in any urban high school in the country right now. I dare you to put Shelby Steele's first book in any urban high school right now. Put them in there. You want to teach the history? Teach the history. But I digress. I do want to shout out that the Breakfast Club and Charlamagne the God. That was a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful interview. And the reason why it was so wonderful was because they allowed the sister to answer the questions. They asked the question, she answered the question. And part of the reason why it was a conversation, I believe, is that her answers were full answers. So there was very little to push back on. Now, you could push back if you disagree with the answers, but it was kind of tough to disagree with the answers because they made so much sense. And they were well articulated, and the argument was well laid out. The only way you could have really argued with her answers is just that if you came to start an argument. And that's the only way you could have argued. Shout out to those young people on that morning show this morning for having Candace Owens. But more importantly than that, shout out to them for having a beautifully wonderful conversation about politics with no anger, with no neck rolling, with no eye rolling, and with no name calling. It was beautiful to see. If you get a chance, watch it after 10 p.m. So